Hi, this is Jim Hensel from Portland, Oregon. Today I'm going to show you how to build a jig to build handholds in beehive boxes. What you see there is a completed jig. It has a sled that holds the box piece, and then it runs transverse to the blade. The blade itself is tilted 15 degrees towards me, and the sled itself is also 15 degrees, which then makes a nice pocket handhold. So I'll go through how I built it, and you'll get to see here in a second what they look like. I'm using a adjustable dado blade set to about a 1/2 inch width. You could set anything you want. This is a standard table saw. I'm actually standing to the right of the table saw. Normally you would be standing in the foreground here. You can just see the dado blade underneath the sled as it's spinning there. Took this piece of plywood and laid 2 strips in the grooves in my table saw, and actually then just glued and stapled it together so that it will fit. You can see the grooves there in the table saw. So this fits in there and is held nicely in place. And I'm going to run my sleds across this because they need to run transverse to the normal direction of the table saw. So this is a jig for cutting boards at an angle. I have it set to more or less 15 degrees, and you can see how it cuts a board at an angle as this piece slides through. It makes the fence effectively have a 15-degree angle. You could make one of these quite simply. This one happens to be hinged on the end and is adjustable to different degrees. So then I ran the wedges through the saw to reduce this length or width here to more, not quite a point, but shorter. It's been my experience using the dado blade that the ones I have are smaller, and so having this distance shorter means that the blade has to rise out of the table saw less. Next I'm going to make 2 sleds that use the wedges and a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to hold it up at the right angle, so I'll end up within a table that's at 15 degrees. So now I have 2 sleds. One will be for the long side of the box and one will be for the short side. So now I've added 2 runners so that this piece can slide back and forth. Of course, the saw blade is oriented this way, and so this is going to run into the saw from the side. One of the sleds was just a little bit narrower, and so I had to add a little piece along here to make it the same width as the other one. That's really just a carpentry error on my part. Make sure when you're putting in these 2 runners that you use the wider of the 2 sleds and then adjust the narrow one accordingly. So here's the final jig. You can see on the far side there I had to shorten up the runner. If I was to do this over again, I would have made the little sleds longer than the 19 7/8 plus some edges. So for example, I would have made this sled is for the short side on a 8-frame box, but I would have made this sled, I could have made both sleds maybe 2 inches longer than the longest side, so maybe 22 inches instead of just whatever I had here. I think about 16 inches. It would have made this process easier. I wouldn't have had to shorten that side because those runners would have been on the outside of the sled. But it works fine for the short side. So what happens here is the short side board is put in. Maybe better to show you from this side. Short side board is put in. You can see the blade under here. So the short side board is put in here, held with both thumbs, and then pushed through until it hits this stop over here. Again, if I was to do it over again, I would have made this table instead of yeah, let me see how long it is here. Mine happens to be 19 inches long. I would have made it maybe 24 inches long, so I could have just nailed a stop. Could have just nailed a stop out here on the board. It wouldn't have mattered, but this just happens to be what I had. But this underboard should be maybe 24 by 24 by 24 would work, and then you could put these lower runners on, or the under runners wouldn't matter, but you could put the lower runners on so that they were wide enough to hold a sled that would including these little pieces to hold the board in place, would hold the longest side in place as well. But anyway, so you put it on here, turn on the table saw, and run it in like so from the side, bring it back, and you have one that looks like this. Now this is the first one I cut, and you can see I made a little mistake there, but I'll show you another one that I made here. So it looks pretty good. And if you want a bit more undercut there, you can make the angle of the blade a little bit more than 14 degrees. So there you go. So here are the last three handles that I did. And here's what happens when you don't move the sled, but just move try to move the board out of the way. Still usable, just not as pretty. Well, there you go. It's a nice looking handle for your beehives. Hope you enjoy.